I got quiet at least. Hey, Carrie, good to see you. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to DCHFA, where it's always a great day. Before we get started, I'm going to bring up my wonderful colleague who has all the money, Director Colleen Green, for a few words. Then I'm going to give you a few words, and then we're going to roll directly into the presentation. Director Green.
Good morning. I'm so grateful that Chris gave me a moment to speak before he started into his speech and his pastoral counseling. So I always have to go in front of him. But anyway, I just want to welcome everybody this morning. I'm happy to be here as part of the town hall meeting, really looking to look at the presentation, the feedback. As you know, we coordinate greatly with HFA and looking forward to coordinating in the future and hopefully seeing some changes and moving projects forward. So we've been doing a lot of listening sessions and conversations. I think that this presentation, from what I see, will give some answers and also foster some conversation. So I'm happy to be here, be part of the conversation and to listen and to see what's coming forward. Thank you.
All right, so I will be brief here. The purpose of the day is twofold. Number one, to tell you just where the status of the market is, where bond cap is. I know that's been a big question for a lot of folks. And then secondly, to talk about the process. And we're going to walk through those two things. But let me take a moment to acknowledge we've heard from a lot of you, and we know that it is exceptionally challenging as you're thinking through how to manage your resources and how to get deals done. Please know that we are thinking through and trying to come up with solutions that will facilitate that. They're not always what you want to hear, right? So let's just say that off the top. I understand that, right? We also know that you guys are at risk and you're trying to measure and be thoughtful about how you deploy your capital. We will continue to evolve our process to meet the moment, right? And we're having, as you know, annual confabs on how the rules go in terms of the MOA and we deploy capital. We're going to have another round coming up here in July. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But our solutions are imperfect, right? But we're here in partnership. We want to hear from you. If there are things that you've been thinking about that you want to share with us, we're going to give you a way to communicate those things in the presentation. But other than that, I'm happy to see most of you. You guys may not be happy to see me anymore, but I still love you. So it's okay. So I've got my two colleagues here with me, and I'm going to bring them up, and they're going to walk you through the presentation. I think you guys know Marcus Irving, the SVP of Multifamily and Neighborhood Investment, and Scott Hutter. You all know Scott if you've done any business with us, who's our director. So gentlemen, the floor is yours.
All right, good morning, everyone. Once again, my name is Marcus Irving. I'm the Senior Vice President here at DCHFA. I'm just cresting over 7-8 months or so. Interesting environment. So as Director Donald said, purpose of today's meeting is going to be twofold, kind of give you a lay of the land on where we are. In terms of housekeeping and questions, we have set up an email address that you can send specific questions to. We may have a little bit of time towards the end for networking, but we do have some active stuff going on. However, we encourage you to use that email address to send some questions that we can use for our process. Scott Hutter is going to join in the second half of the presentation to kind of go through the process. Many of you may be familiar with it or not, but that it's a very regimented process, very clear and cut. So the newest addition, this. All right. So the newest addition to this presentation is going to be, we're going to go through the January readiness results. Hopefully by seeing this landscape, it gives you a better picture of what to expect going into 25. As Director Green and Director Donald mentioned, we are still working through that process. So we may not have the answers now, but as we have had several meetings with different sponsors, consortiums and such, we're taking all that information and being very intentional about how we proceed. Just basic agenda, covered opening remarks. We'll go over the review. We'll talk about the pipeline of transactions that did come in through 24, what's currently in 24. And then Scott will pick up on general overview and then some portions for Q&A. We also have a great spread, so please fill out. All right, so in terms of the 2024 results, just to give you that landscape, we received 15 applications. There were 8 that were selected for further underwriting. They spanned awards across awards 1, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And then there were 7 transactions within that pipeline that were deferred to a future readiness round, totaling approximately $302 million in bond cap. The big takeaway, 2024 is all accounted for. We all know that. So what you're thinking is, how am I going to plan for 2025? The goal being to take some time to onboard transactions, get them induced, get them through the council process, get them through DHCD, ultimately get you at the light at the end of the tunnel, putting heads in beds. So if you are planning to come in our July 25 round, you can expect that the onboarding may occur sometime in Q1 of 2025, just in terms of timing. If you're not already in the readiness round, you're probably looking at least a year out. Sorry, July 24. Thank you. Good correction for the record. July 2024 round. That date hasn't been published, but when that round does open up, you're looking at about a 6-month lag until being onboarded and then proceeding. So this kind of covers the lay of the land of the projects selected for further underwriting, currently in the pipeline, 24 cap already prescribed. The future pipeline. These were the 10 transactions that also passed DHCD's threshold review. The presentation is being recorded, so you don't have to worry about taking pictures, but if you need to take a snapshot. These were the 10 transactions, approximately 1,500 units, over $442 million. So we start to see that, yes, there is a huge need for cap, and we're working through it.
Marcus, it's important to note that these are in alphabetical order, has nothing to do with this fund.
Correct. So for those who, and just for those virtually, this does not account for any kind of priority or scoring. They're just purely in alphabetical order. Other notes, this doesn't include several known transactions requiring future bond cap. So we know that there's a universe of deals that everyone is working on. If it's not on here, it's part of the consideration for projects that will need future bond cap. Currently, we're looking at interest for bond cap through 2026, just based on the deals that we have here and known and unknown ones that may be working their way through the pipeline. So that final note about additional transactions that have not yet completed the threshold determination. Once again, you're probably looking at least a year out, depending on where you make yourself into that queue, and then ultimately coming into the DCHFA readiness process. So these are the two newest additions to the presentation. We will note that we will come back for a subsequent town hall. That date has not been identified, but it's going to be a similar format where we're describing to you sort of what's happening, given some transparency, lay of the land, and where things stand. And we think this is a good first step in that direction. All right, so the readiness review process. So as many of you may know, or new folks in the room, it's a process that's done between us. It's a tri-party agreement between us, DHCD, and DEMPED. It is a competitive process. So as you know, projects that are seeking bond cap must first apply to DHCD for a threshold score review. Our process is that we score from highest to lowest. There's nothing about when your project came in, first in, first out. It's purely the score that guides the decision. So we prioritize bond cap awards based on that evaluation score. This ensures consistency in the process. Each year, DHCD opens up their round, typically January and July. We also have a January and July round. So when we open up our July round, when we talk about the other transactions that are out there, those in theory are the folks that applied in January, awaiting the score, would apply in July, plus any others that were selected for further underwriting. And so once again, that last footnote right there at the bottom, we'll bold it, put an asterisk. Applicants should anticipate that an application selected in the July 24 readiness round should anticipate inducement somewhere on or about Q1 of 2025 when we're able to onboard them. So just giving you some, not certainty of execution, but rather transparency, and for you planning your deals on how this is going to work with your own pipeline. All right, so this is where we kind of get into the administrative piece of things. It's going to be a little bit more in the weeds, but I think for any new folks in the room, this would be helpful. For some of the other practitioners, this might seem redundant, but it's a good refresher. There are some updates in terms of the Greater Greener Buildings Government Act, which is going to require projects to be built to net zero. That is going to be a shift for the July round, so we will talk about that. And some other little notes. So at this time, I'm going to pivot over to Scott Hutter, who is great at what he does. He has a lot of touch points with all of you to kind of get into some of the details on our DCHFA process. Thank you, Scott. Thanks.
Right, and I can dive in, talk about the process for the readiness review process. Happy to get into the weeds in the question and answer. So in terms of the process for DCHFA, we complete these readiness reviews in January and July of each year. And for the application materials, all of the information is going to be available on the DCHFA multifamily mortgage revenue bond webpage. So we'll be continuing to update that over time for the Greener Government Buildings Act memo and the adherence to that. That's something where we're in conversations with DC Department of Energy and Environment, and we'll have something on our website shortly. So for the readiness review requirements, that includes the completed stage 2 checklist. So that's really all of the underwriting materials that my staff need to go through your application and prepare for our credit committee and for our board presentation for eligibility inducement. Additionally, we need to see evidence of filing for construction permits with a minimum of 1 review, current letters of intent for all of the financing sources. So that would be for your construction debt, your permanent debt, equity, as well as any subordinated debt sources that make the transaction financially feasible. Estimates of construction pricing completed by the general contractor on the DHCD Form 215. We use that for consistency, and so we'll clearly understand what goes into your hard cost bid. One of the new aspects of the submission process will be a memo demonstrating compliance with the Greener Government Buildings Act and any amendments to that act. With that, it's something where the transactions that applied in the January 2024 round, based on the way that the legislation stood at that point, that was not something that was required for those transactions. There's been a shift as of April 1st. Any transaction that does not have a prior award, competitive award from a district entity, would be required to be net zero. So there's a lot more to it. I'll caveat, I'm not an attorney. That it's a very complicated law. There's many amendments, and so part of this memo will make sure that the development community clearly understands what those Greener Government Buildings Act requirements are, as well as ensuring that we can clearly understand where you stand in that process. And lastly, we want to see the DHCD threshold approval and evaluation score letter. We want to ensure that the project can receive the 4% low-income housing tax credits under the QAP and where you score in terms of the prioritization. For transactions that previously submitted and now are being deferred, were deferred to this round. What we're looking for is any items that were missing from a prior application. If you had an incomplete application, as well as updated sponsor financials, those would be your audits for your entities that are providing guarantees, your updated closing time frame, updated financial model in the DHCD Form 202, updated letters of intent, updated site control documents if there's been any extensions to your purchase and sale agreement or option to purchase land, updated project narrative talking about where the project is now in the process, and then those updated construction cost estimates. There's been a lot of changes in terms of what's going on with the construction market, so we want to be sure that when we evaluate your project, we don't have stale bits. And then lastly, any additional information that falls under things that have changed over time. We know that it can be a quickly changing market, and we want to be sure that we're not reviewing old information for your project. In terms of the permit review, we can drill in on a couple of these items where folks frequently have questions. We want to see evidence of filing for the construction permits with a minimum of 1 review. So this can consist of a review from kind of your standard vanilla filing with the Department of Buildings, or a review from an approved third-party reviewer under the Department of Buildings third-party program. Some of the submissions that won't work would be reviews or notes from a preliminary design review meeting known as a PDRM. For those, it's something where that's really more so talking about the process of filing for a permit. It's not a substantive review of plans. And then the other aspect would be a future promise of approvals through the accelerated plan review program without a review from the Department of Buildings. We want to be sure that you are far along in your permitting process and with your plans and specifications, and that that second bullet just doesn't work. We want to see current letters of intent. We know that folks have been working on these projects for a long time, and we want to be sure that your financing partners are still vested in your transaction and that things have not shifted with the capital markets. So we want to see that those were provided within the last 3 months of the readiness review application deadline. So for this round, this would be if your LOI is dated before April of 24, you either have to provide an updated LOI or we want to have correspondence from the account executive at debt or equity or any of the subordinated loan funds stating that these LOI terms are still applicable. For the DHCD threshold and evaluation score, that threshold and evaluation score has to be completed prior to submitting for DCHFA readiness review. So question we often get is, can I apply to DHCD in July and also apply to DCHFA in that same time period? That doesn't work with the process because DHCD needs to be able to review those applications. That takes time. And so for this upcoming, for the current round, you have to have submitted in a prior round and actually have that letter completed and in hand. So the DHCD threshold review round for January of 24 is currently under review. Those would be documents that you'd be submitting in July. And then the entire letter, including the DHCD evaluation score, needs to be submitted. So we want to see not only that you passed threshold, but additionally, we have third-party verification of the scores so we can prioritize transactions. And then additionally, if you didn't apply in one of these DHCD threshold reviews and instead you applied in a NOFA round, that NOFA round includes the, if you were submitting for 4% low-income housing tax credits, that's something where that NOFA round would address the threshold evaluation for LIHTC as well as your score. So that will work as well. For the readiness review, we'll have the time frame for this July round posted to our website soon. In terms of that time frame, the way that this will work is you'll submit to DCHFA. DCHFA will review the application that's been submitted and will provide a letter notifying the sponsor that had submitted the application if there's anything that is problematic with that application, if there's any errors, a document doesn't match what we need to review, or if there's any omissions. There's a lot of items on the checklist, and folks may forget to submit something. So we'll notify you, and you have 5 business days to go ahead, work through those items and resubmit. So try and do your best to get it right the first time, but if something happens, the file does not upload, you'll have that 5 business days to work through it. For the transactions that have passed the readiness review, that have fulfilled all of those requirements, they're in a bucket of the transactions that could prospectively proceed. And so with that, we will go ahead and select projects for further underwriting based on the highest DHCD evaluation score, working down that list until the applicable bond cap for that funding round is exhausted. And after we complete the process, you'll be notified if your project is moving forward to further underwriting and you fulfilled the readiness requirements and you have a score that is competitive in that round. If you completed everything for that readiness review and there's insufficient bond cap in that round for you to proceed to further underwriting, you'll be notified. And at that point, you'd have to go ahead and submit at a later date. And then the last thing would be if we let you know any cure items for errors and omissions, you weren't able to address those within that 5 business day time frame, you'll be notified if you had an incomplete application. For our eligibility underwriting, after we go through the process, we send out those letters for proceeding to further underwriting. We'll have an underwriting kickoff meeting with my staff, and then additionally, we'll go through and talk about what's going on with your process, get you ramped up for our credit committee. All transactions must be approved by the DCHFA credit committee before they can be escalated to our board of directors, and those credit committee meetings are happening in the week prior to the board presentations. DCHFA's board meetings are held every second and fourth Tuesday of each month, and we can only go ahead and present up to 4 transactions to our board of directors. All of your transactions are complicated, and there's only so much time on the schedule. The eligibility resolution requires a 30-day legislative passive approval by DC Council. So I'll talk on the next slide about what a legislative day is, but with that process, it takes about 50 to 65 days after you are approved by the DCHFA Board of Directors. And then once you receive that eligibility resolution for tax exempt bonds, you have board authorization for 180 days. The projects that are approved for the eligibility resolution must come back to DCHFA for final bond within those 180 days prior to that eligibility resolution expiring. Drilling in for the eligibility resolution and talking more about what the passive approval for that looks like is once the transaction is approved by the DCHFA Board of Directors, the eligibility resolution is submitted to DC Council. Once submitted, there's a 30 legislative day passive review process. With that, it excludes Saturdays, Sundays, holidays, and DC Council recess. That's typically held between July 15th and September 15th. Once the transaction's been checked in to DC Council, you can see what the deemed approved date when it's passively approved is on the DC Council systems. That's really helpful because going through the day count's difficult, and we won't really know until it's been checked in and we get that official date from DC Council. For that eligibility resolution, again, typically that takes about 50 to 65 days after the DCHFA board meeting without taking into account that recess. With the recess, you'd want to think about what's going on with that process. For this July round, again, as Marcus mentioned, folks will submit in July. We'll work through the process of determining which transactions are moving forward to further underwriting. And then we'd go through and we'd be working on the eligibility underwriting in 1Q of 25. The other aspect of what's going on with HFA's tax exempt bond issuance, we have to go through a TEFRA process. TEFRA stands for the Tax Equity and Fiscal Responsibility Act. And really for this, what it is that the issuer of the bonds must communicate its issue for the tax exempt bonds and the purpose for issuing those in a public hearing. We have to have public notice. So the TEFRA ad is posted to the HFA website at least 7 calendar days before that public hearing. And for those public hearings, right now, those are being held over a telephone conference line, and a representative of the developer must attend this meeting. After that's completed, we have to receive mayoral approval. It's an active approval. It doesn't have the same council recess concerns that the passive approval for eligibility resolutions would have. And when you're working through your schedules, factor 30 days for that entire TEFRA process, and that can be concurrent with your DC Council passive approval for the eligibility resolution. As we work through, we're going to have underwriting calls for the tax exempt bond issuance. We'll select bond counsel. Everyone will work through their underwriting for debt, equity, subordinated debt, and we ramp up for the those transactions. When we get close to going to financial closing for the tax exempt bonds, we will go ahead and submit a 42M package for tax credit allocation to DHCD. That's kind of your ticket to get the 4% low-income housing tax credits for your transaction. And with that, the items that you'll need are your final Form 202, which is your financial model with your sign-off, your market study, as well as your construction schedule. So with that, we kind of wrapped up the aspects of submitting for the readiness review. Again, this is going to be recorded and published on our HFA website. Here's the URL if folks want to take a picture of it. And then additionally, you have the option to ask us questions in person here, or if you have something that's a little bit more complex or something that you'd like to take offline, feel free to email townhall2024@dchfa.org. So we're all, Marcus and I are here, and we do have some folks from DHCD. So be happy to jump into question and answer.
So I'll just say, given the silence in the room, if the networking aspect is more favorable for folks, and you don't have a plate, we can disperse that way and huddle up as needed. Oscar.
Really?
No, I do, it's more of a kind of slash advocacy question. And like you mentioned, projects that don't have an award from EACD in 24, I have to move to net zero. I'm a builder, right? We're happy to build different and intricate things. I keep saying this everywhere I can get up the soapbox for a minute. Renovations are not going to get there. So preservation deals are going to start suffering really hard if we don't all advocate together for a pathway to those projects to continue to be to continue to compete, because otherwise we lose a lot of properties, a lot of affordable workforce housing opportunity in the city. So to whoever's listening, whoever's interested, to grab you, it just, we've done it. We did a pilot years ago. We got to passive house, which is kind of the step that gets you closer. But that was a lot of money. And I don't know the results years later, how it's performing. So I'm all for it. Builders would like to put things together, but really the buildings in the preservation, we're going to wipe them out of the system. So that's all. It's kind of a question and lead, and I don't know how you can take that.
Yeah, so it's a timely one. So what I would suggest, and not to put you on the spot, but any other builders, developers in the room, if you have that feedback, that'd be important. So I would definitely direct anything specific. So if you have solutions or ideas, if you have a pilot project that you worked on, if you've almost met that requirement, and you can share some of those lessons learned, I think that'll be helpful for the conversation. So for those active in that role, we rely upon your expertise. So thanks, Oscar. Patrick.
It's 3 to 2 million funds requirement in this round for non-selected, right? And then there's 10 projects aspirational for 442 million, which includes those over. So I do understand that there's 7 and 2 million over. There was 3 additional projects going 40 million per annum.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, Patrick, what happened there is we had 7 applications that could not proceed. One of those transactions opted to do an alternative execution that did not include tax exempt bonds. So it was 6 transactions. And then there were 4 projects that did not apply in January of 2024. Main reason there is that they were working through and ramping up their permitting efforts. So that's what's going on with the math. That's where there's the disconnect. It's not 3, it's 4 of those projects that did not apply in that January round.
Can you say something about the communication with the city with respect to using the branding structure and whether that's going to be pursued?
Yeah, so that one, I'm going to defer to our colleagues over at DHCD. So the question was about, if you want to come into the mic, but about communication with the city and use of the ground lease structure. Sure.
Yes, sir, please.
Coming to the mic, we have Christopher Early, Deputy Director.
I'm sorry, I have to admit, I was checking the email. I heard ground lease though. What was the question? Hey, okay.
To proceed with a developer selected, should expect you proceed with the branding structure.
Mm-hmm.
What the status is of that,
Mm-hmm.
so that review and work.
Sure. Yeah, I think that structure is there's been a lot of work put into that. Quite frankly, it's still under review to make sure that we're thinking about it from all the various perspectives. So more to come on that, but we're gonna put that in the parking lot and make sure we follow up with you on it.
This is a bit of a complicated subject, but as DCHFA or DHC going on the potentially announcing what the minimum passing score is these rounds in the future, so that folks know, not necessarily know all the scores, but at least what the threshold, ballpark is. But
Yeah, so Patrick, you know that's going to vary depending on the quality of the projects. What I will say is the market has evolved quite a bit and got a lot more sophisticated. So as time has gone on from when we started this at the beginning of 23 to now, projects have gotten much stronger, right? So we can't tell you definitively that you have to have a score that's X. What we will tell you is that there's got to be a thoughtful balance between a project that's really robust and put together well and the cost, right? So we just talked about net zero, which is a factor that can drive your cost, but we also know that net zero is really important in the QAP. So we think an important part of this will be as we go into conversations in the future around the QAP that folks are aware of and participating and giving that feedback so that we can know from the market, hey, this cost us a lot of money, right? Can we balance that, right? But that's just a back and forth, but there's no magic number. If you score a 20, you're probably not that competitive, right? Like that's kind of self-explanatory. But if we kind of move up the scale, it's much harder to give you a definitive number. That's fair. So if we're going to get into mechanics of that, Chris, I'm going to have you come back up again just about scores and how you guys think about sharing that information. Or the wonderful director, Green. Don't fall. We got bad insurance.
My legs are short, so Chris got up here fast. We've heard a lot of feedback. I don't know who's heard a lot of feedback recently about people wanting to know like where they landed in terms of scoring and you know what the scores were. So we'll be distributing the entire results so that people can compare and with a little information on each project. So we're just kind of working on that. So I made a commitment to myself that I would get that out at some point soon so that you all would have some information and going into the next round of applications. I think that's fair. I think what we had previously was that people didn't want to put out their sort of information about sort of maybe their magic in their own projects so that it would be competitive. But I do like the idea of transparency. So we're working on a way to get that out, the scores and, you know, just information that people won't feel like too much was out there because that was sort of the pushback previously. Does that answer your question? Okay. Any other DHC questions?
The end of last year, DHC was pushing to get the statute. And then have one. That's still a goal of DHC?
Yes, it is still a goal. We're still trying to push, working with the council member's office, the committee chairman for housing, to just kind of stretch that out to make sure it doesn't apply and upset sort of what people have already done, because that is obviously a big expense and huge difference, particularly in this environment where money is tight and things like that. It's not the greatest timing to do that. So conversations are still being had around trying to extend that. Absolutely.
Well, is there a way that either of you would want the community to weigh in on that process? Or
You should weigh in. Absolutely. So just like a little inside baseball, someone was trying to do a good thing and they included affordable housing in the legislation and before talking to anybody. So, I mean, I think as much advocacy as an agency, we could advocate, but we work for the mayor. So any outside, advocacy around, that making sense to the affordable housing community, I think that can only be helpful. But I think the underwriting and housing professionals are in agreement that maybe this is not the right time or even the best method to do that.
Yeah, on the people, the bill was not referred to the housing committee, it was referred to.
If you want to, it won't be recorded, or I don't know if you want to. Make up.
On who, the bill was referred not to the housing committee recently. So the bill was referred to the transportation and energy and environment committee, and then to the facilities committee. So those would be the two offices to go to.
The housing committee chairman.
Yeah, and just, I guess that was the other thing is you mentioned there was some maybe memos, whatever. So you think it's a legislative fix is needed, not a administrative, like.
I think it's a legislative fix, yes, because we have to follow the law that's in place. That's what's sort of driving it. Yes. Okay.
All right, guys, we are here. We're gonna hang out for a while.
Sorry, one more DC thing. You said, I just want to clarify, you said that obviously S4 versus the first out. At the same time, you kind of made it seem like it was a priority for those 10.
No, we didn't.
That's not true at all.
That's not true at all.
Okay.
We sanitize the list. There are no priorities in this presentation. All right, cool. We're around, guys. Thank you very much for coming.